Okay. Testing audio. Can you all hear me? Woo.
So excited about tonight's agenda.
Okay, we're good. Go for it, Lauren.
All right, well, now I'm going to delay. Okay, good night, everybody, or good evening, everybody. I'd like to make the call for a meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the city's website at www.milwaukieoregon.gov. You may locate them by navigating to the community calendar, where tonight's meetings page is posted. If you have not reviewed the agenda, please do so. It contains important information about our process. If you wish to provide public comment, please log into the Zoom meeting or call into the meeting. Instructions for logging in and calling in are located on the meeting page on the city's website. In order to be included in the meeting, recorded public comments must be received during the applicable portion of the meeting. This is general comments must be made during the open audience participation portion of the meeting, and comments on a specific public hearing or work session must be made before the close of the public testimony portion of the agenda item. We'll follow the basic public hearing procedures format listed on the back of the agenda. It includes the hearing procedure steps. We may vary from the process based on the specific circumstance. Next on the agenda is approval for the meeting minutes from February 23rd, 2021. Do any of the commissioners have any corrections to make or comments?
I have one comment, and I don't know if it really matters, but the format seems to change from what is typically done, and I don't know if that's going to hold up any part of the meetings, but I know that you guys have been doing an excellent job with the meeting notes, and so if you want to correct the format, that would be wonderful.
The format in which way? I'm sorry.
What happens is that it begins into a group discussion. And then instead of highlighting each name on a line and what they say, it all kind of got jumbled in together.
Yep, we've been going back and forth. We've been talking a lot about the minutes since we have a new person who's doing the minutes. And then we've also been talking to the city recorder's office about the minutes and trying to come up with a kind of a happy medium between not quoting verbatim, but not giving enough information. So trying to make more condensed notes. And so that was our first attempt in doing that. So I guess I would ask you all if that's okay with you, or we've had different varieties of notes. We went back and studied all of the notes over the years, and different people have done it differently over time. And so this is where we've landed for now. And if you feel that there's not enough information, we could talk about adding more information, or if we can continue to try this for a few times, I'm happy to take whatever feedback you all might have on that.
I'm sorry, I guess my comment is not so much about the information. My comment is just that typically when we've highlighted a name, it stands on its own line. And when it comes to detail wise, I think just a very brief summary is perfectly fine, because these are recorded on the YouTube page and placed back forever and ever and ever, right? So, you're just trying to get a summary. I realize I forgot her name, Janine, right? That kind of took over writing the notes. She has way expanded out what has been done in the past. So that is appreciative, but I don't know if it's necessarily necessary. And it is not the main form of communication or the way to show the public this meeting.
Yes, we've been going back and forth, and she's learning. She's in a learning mode, so it's kind of one of those things where she writes it all because she doesn't exactly know the processes, and she's learning as she's going through all of this. So we're trying to find a happy medium. So I appreciate the feedback that having more condensed notes is helpful. And yeah, and I think that the point of her putting the names all together is that is kind of denoting this was a group discussion, and putting it all in one paragraph and saying this is what the group talked about. And that was the reason for that change in the format.
I have a question for you, Laura. Are the recordings provided with closed caption?
I don't believe they are. Mary, maybe you would know off the top of your head, but I don't believe they are.
That's a good point, Lauren. I was going to put my 2 cents in too. I think they're automated by YouTube, but they're not, you can't guarantee that's going to be portraying the closed captioning correctly. It's just auto-generated.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's useful to have the detailed minutes for those who are hearing impaired.
That would be my only reason, because otherwise I would say brevity is kind of the key for meeting minutes, but I'll defer to you all.
And I can ask too how City Council handles that and how they do that and what the process is, and if there's another format through which people can get, see the whole meeting. But I will ask about that.
Okay, great. Commissioner Heemner, any other thoughts? Anyone else have any corrections or comments about the meeting minutes? If not, then I would like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes, the notes as presented.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
All right. All those opposed? Looks like we are all for. Okay, moving on then, informational items. Are there any informational items from staff?
Not at this time. We'll share some things a little bit later.
Okay, great. Audience participation. This is an opportunity to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. If you wish to comment on any items on the agenda, there will be time for those during the presentation. Do we have anybody attending, Mary?
We do. I don't think any of them are wanting to submit comments right now. I think they're probably either going to be with the next hearings. Yeah.
Okay, then I'm going to move on to.
And if you people who are attending, you can raise your hand if you do want to comment, and it's not about the hearing.
Okay, we'll give a couple seconds here. Raise your hand, please, if you would like to comment on something not on the agenda.
I think we're good to go.
Okay. Then the next agenda item is Milwaukie High School sign variance. All right, the public hearing on Milwaukie High School sign variance is called to order. The purpose of the hearing is to consider application number VR-2021-002. The purpose of the application is to request a sign variance on the property located at 2301 Southeast Willard Street. The applicant has the burden of proving the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee zoning ordinance, comprehensive plan, any applicable municipal code provision, and the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask that staff cite the zoning ordinance section where the criteria can be found.
Yes, it's 14.32 sign adjustment, 14.08.090 conditional and community service use signs, 14.16.010 residential sign zone sign district, and 19.1006 type 3 review.
Thank you, Mary. All testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow a response precludes an action for damages in the circuit court. Any part withstanding may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons withstanding are those who submit comments or testify. We will recognize those persons submitting testimony. Please state your name and email for the record so that they may be entered into the minutes. Mary, do we have anyone who has submitted for testimony?
Nothing at this time that hasn't already been provided to you in written comment.
Okay, we'll finish this out and see if anybody changes their mind here in the next few seconds. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria. And to avoid repetition and information not relevant, the moderator must mute you. The moderator may mute you if disruptions occur. Anyone raise their hand at this point in time if you'd like to be recognized?
Lauren, I think you jumped a little bit ahead here.
I believe we're going to go the staff presentation first, Chair Lisville. Maybe there's a page missing.
Staff cited the zoning ordinance. I went directly to conduct of hearing, page 4.
Okay, well, we're going to back up a little bit and we're going to go to Mary's staff presentation. Sorry about that.
I didn't want to cut you short, Mary, but I don't see where it says.
We also have conflict of interest and
Yes, we have to get through the conflict of interest, which is next on page 4. I'm just gonna, for my own, staff report is on page 5.
Okay.
I am just reading the teleprompter here, but it's 2 pages out. Would you like me to stop?
I believe that the order is conflict of interest, and then it would go to the staff presentation, correct?
It is, and I have not gotten to conflict of interest yet.
Okay. I love Zoom.
Yeah, page 3. Here comes page 4. If any additional comments or evidence are provided by any part, the commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. Conflicts of interest, site visits. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing? Please raise your hand. I'm seeing no hands raised. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest? Raise your hand. No hands raised. Does any member of Planning Commission wish to report any ex parte conflicts? Raise your hand. None. Will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to this hearing please raise their hand? I'm seeing, 4 hands total raised. 1 hand not raised. Did any of those commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or know anything different from what is indicated in the staff report for this application?
No.
No. I'm seeing all no's from those who visited. Does anyone of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission? Mary, let me know. Please raise your hand if you do.
I'm seeing none.
Okay. Page 5, jurisdictional issues. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? Mary?
Not seeing anything.
No hands raised. Staff report. Here we go. Let's proceed to the staff report presentation since the suspense is built for the last 3 minutes.
Oh boy.
Please, Mary, entertain
Too
us.
much pressure. Okay, let me pull up the PowerPoint here.
And then
Looks like
I'm
you
going to
can see
ask
that.
everybody to go on mute because I do hear a TV in the background, so including myself.
Okay. All right. Let me adjust my screen here. Okay. So yes, Mary Heberling with this City of Milwaukee Assistant Planner. I'm here to present the staff report for VR 2021-002, the signed variance review for Milwaukie High School at 2301 Southeast Willard Street. All right. Location. So Milwaukie High School is approximately 14.65 acres. Whoop, sorry about that. Acres big. And I've marked here kind of where the proposed sign location is, just so it makes sense with the aerial shot here. And so it's going to be in the southwest portion of the site, around the corner of 23rd when it meets with Willard Street there on the south end of the lot. And it's around where the parking lot is, the entrance, main entrance to get to the high school. So in terms of zoning, the underlying zone, base zone for Milwaukie High School is R2, one of our residential zones. It also has a community service use, CSU designation as well. And in terms of surrounding zones, you can see there on to the west, there's the downtown mixed use zone in red. Then kind of close to that is R1B, which is residential business, where it allows kind of more commercial uses with some residential. Then as more east you go, it gets more residential, so R2. And then R7 in that yellow is kind of just a little bit farther out to the east. So I'm going to go a little bit into some of the history, land use history for this proposal, as it sort of makes sense to talk about it with this. So back in 2006, the North Clackamas School District and Milwaukie High School applied for an electronic sign as well. It was a different location, and I believe a different size as well, but it was asking for an electronic sign back in 2006. It was denied by the Planning Commission, and then North Clackamas School Districts appealed to City Council based on that Planning Commission decision, and then it was inevitably approved by City Council in 2006 here. Our city attorney graciously let me know that I should mention to you all that prior council's decision cannot be interpreted as providing any sort of precedent or direction into how current city council would view an application, or if there is any future appeal to them as well. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. And then I kind of wanted to clarify a little bit about why in 2006 it went through a community service use sign variance and why today we're doing a sign adjustment variance. And it really comes down to specific language in the code. So per the CSU sign code, it talks about signs for community service uses shall be limited to the underlying zone, which would be the residential zone for Milwaukie High School, except for what's allowed in kind of their details for community service use sign. And the community service use details for signs does not address illumination. And so therefore it's left to the residential sign code to vary rather than vary the CSU. So that's why we're doing a sign adjustment process this time versus a CSU variance as we did last time. And per the residential sign code, all allowed signs in residential zones require external illumination only. So an electronic sign would not fall under external illumination, and therefore that's why the school district is proposing a sign adjustment. So the proposal is for an electronic reader board. You can see a rendering there on your screen. The size of the total size of the sign is going to be about 18.56 square feet, and then the display area is proposed to be 16.8 square feet. As I mentioned previously, residential zones only allow external illumination, therefore the sign adjustment is needed to that particular standard in the code. Current zones that allow electronic signs are downtown mixed use, so that red portion that you saw on a previous map, but only along McLaughlin Boulevard. And then commercial zones such as limited commercial, CL, NMU, GMU, those sort of mixed use zones and commercial zones. And the CCS zone is where Milwaukie Marketplace is zoned. And then manufacturing zones as well. So business, industrial, manufacturing, North Milwaukie area, that sort of thing. And those are where we currently have any electronic signs. So we'll go into some of the key issues here. So the proposal needs to show for a sign adjustment that they are meeting the authorization criteria to grant the proposal. And in particular, there's two, but we're only going to address one because you only need to address one, and the other one doesn't work with this proposal. And it is, would strict application of this chapter cause an undue or unnecessary hardship? And another note, we want to make sure that Planning Commission is not serving as a policy-making body and more analyzing it against the approval criteria. So what I mean by that is a policy around, say, public schools have to allow this and this and this is different than saying, according to the approval criteria, they're meeting this criteria and therefore we can grant their proposal. So as Planning Commission, you're looking at the approval criteria. City Council is more of where the policy kind of making decisions are made. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. So when we talk about undue or necessary hardship and having to show if application of the code would cause that, the applicant did provide us some information, and they said that the adjustment is based on special and unusual circumstances related to the high school and the specific sign. They also stated it's the only high school in the district without this type of sign. North Clackamas School District deems it an essential communication tool to have an electronic reader board, and the building is deemed a Category 4 critical essential building for a community during a disaster, and the sign would help disseminate information in an emergency. So for staff's analysis on the approval criteria, we did come up with some concerns that we had, and the burden of the applicant is to show that the code is causing an undue or unnecessary hardship. And some of the concerns that we had about wondering if the proposal meets that criteria, if the information the applicant provided us meets the criteria, is that we had some concerns about comparing to other high schools in the district. How is the lack of electronic sign causing an undue or unnecessary hardship? And it's going to sound repetitive, but the undue and unnecessary hardship part is kind of key because that's listed in the criteria. We also had concerns about if other schools in Milwaukie are similarly zoned, they have that underlying residential zone. What is unique about Milwaukie High School to allow this adjustment? And in particular, what is specifically an undue or unnecessary hardship for Milwaukie High School in comparison to other schools in Milwaukie? If another school wanted to ask for an electronic sign as well, what is the distinction between Milwaukie High School and other schools in Milwaukie that would allow for them to get this sign adjustment and other schools not? And then the applicant needs to show that denial of the electronic sign creates an undue or unnecessary hardship related to their messaging function as a school. And when we talk about that, it's mostly wanting to make sure that that an electronic sign is causing or not having an electronic sign is causing the undue and unnecessary hardship in comparison to what they currently could do today. So as a community service use, they're allowed to have a larger sign, noticing that a lot of CSUs are in residential areas and they have unique designations because they're a little bit different than residential. It's things like hospitals, schools, churches, or other religious institutions. And so they're different, but they're in the middle of residential areas. And so they're allowed to kind of have more signs that are larger than allowed in the residential zone. And so we want to make sure that an adjustment to allow electronic sign isn't causing less undue or unnecessary hardship, or I guess more, I think is what I'm trying to say. So we want to make sure that in this particular case, electronic sign is allowing, and what are the specific ways that the electronic sign is allowing Milwaukie High School to continue their messaging functions in a way that is different than what they currently could do today. And so we did receive some comments from the community. In particular, we've received some comments from the Historic Milwaukie NDA in support of the proposal. Basically, they supported the intention of the sign and its function as being a tool to facilitate communication for not only the high school, but also for the community. And then we also received some comments from community members, Yvonne and Tori McVeigh, in support of the proposal. And they had highlighted some frustrations with schools attempting to build improvements. And it felt like to them it required a fight against the city to get things approved. And I just kind of wanted to highlight that a little bit and completely understand where the frustration is coming from. And for this particular case, it's difficult because the sign adjustment in the sign code is very broad. It's for anything that you're adjusting in the sign code. So it's not specifically tailored towards a school or a CSU or any other specific use. So it has to be pretty broad. And the authorization to grant a sign adjustment is pretty strict because they're wanting to avoid any potential negative impacts that could happen from a variety of different cases if it's going to be kind of a broad coverage of adjusting the sign code in general. And then we also have the issue of not having public facilities as their own zone or own overlay zone. And so we have to work within those community service use designations, meaning that, community service use can be a wide variety of things, right? So it's just kind of working within the structure that we have, and it can seem a little bit frustrating and confusing, but that's kind of the way that we have to work with the code today. And then we also got a letter from North Clackamas School District, the applicant, in response to some of our concerns that we brought up in the staff report. In particular, they wanted to provide more information on use of electronic reader board signs versus non-electric signs and how it gives them the ability to have more messages given throughout a time period than they could do with non-electric signs. It gives them more space to provide more text in general than they could before. So kind of just showing the ease of how it would provide them. They also talked about how it helps to have an electronic reader board to get out messages quickly in case of emergency or just quickly in general, rather than somebody having to go out and change the sign. They could have somebody, probably do it on a computer and change it pretty quickly. And then they also listed out some of the safety measures that have been put in place with the new high school building since it's serving as a category 4 critical essential building. So some of the materials that they have to kind of help if there's a mass need for the building or anything like that. And then also, I think I forgot to mention this. So the approval back in 2006 did happen, but the electronic sign was never built. So then the approval ended up expiring, which is why they've come back to us today. And they also just kind of clarified that the electronic sign wasn't built in 2006 due to funding issues that they had at the time. So we did have a couple of additional concerns and questions as staff from the additional information we got from the applicant today. In particular, it's hard for us to make can't find the right word. It's hard to make us defensible findings with the additional information because there was the lack of the information around or wording around undue or unnecessary hardship. And so we would just want to make sure if we're making any sort of findings that we can make sure it's defensible. And so we had some concerns about with the information that they gave us, it was lacking some of that information. We also want to know how it is causing an undue or unnecessary hardship in comparison to other community service use designated buildings. So religious institutions, churches, hospitals. And if we allow this sign adjustment, what does that mean for any future community service use kind of coming forth to ask for an electronic sign as well? So we just have concerns as it might, open the door a little bit to have other CSUs ask for an electronic signs, and then we understand that it may be difficult to develop defensible findings that are narrow enough to limit the potential for similar requests in the future. So that's just something to consider, kind of some concerns we had as staff. We also had some more questions about this category 4 critical essential building. We weren't sure if Milwaukie High School was deemed that before it was rebuilt or if it has been deemed that for a while, and if pre-new building, it also had been used as a category 4 building. Kind of what's the difference between being a category 4 then and not having an electronic sign, and being a category 4 now and having or wanting an electronic sign. So questions there. We also have questions about if it's a requirement for category 4 buildings to have an electronic reader board. If so, that would be pretty good standing for it being an undue or unnecessary hardship, because it is a requirement as being a category 4 building. If that exists, that would be helpful to us as staff. Also, if there are any requirements around messaging or outreach as a category 4 building, if it means that you need to be able to provide messaging information in a very quick manner. And if so, do they have recommendations, again, going back to the previous one about it being electronic or an electronic reader board of some sort. So we have questions around that. And then also, if there are any other category 4 buildings, one in Milwaukie, that would be useful to know. And two, if they don't have electronic reader boards, and why. What particular unique situations are the reasons why they don't have them, or if that's kind of not as common for other category 4 buildings to have an electronic reader board or not. So those were some of the questions we as staff had based on the additional information we received today.
Okay, thank you, Mary.
Yeah, I'm almost done. Sorry, Lauren. So for staff, just based on the current information that we have, and needing some additional information, we do currently recommend denial at this point, on the basis that it doesn't quite meet the approval criteria granting the adjustment on how it's creating an undue or unnecessary hardship. Again, that's based on the current information that we have today. And then as planning commission, you all have 3 options. You can approve the application with modified findings and conditions of approval, and then such modifications need to be read into the record. And then you could also deny the application upon finding that it does not meet the approval criteria, or you could continue the hearing based on additional information you need or additional time for the applicant to come back with information or things like that. Now I'm done, Lauren.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah.
Commissioners, are there any clarifying questions you might have for staff?
I have one,
Sure.
if I may.
Oh.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Massey.
Commissioner Massey raised his hand, so I want to recognize proper Chair Massey. Commissioner Massey, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So, Mary, first question is, I'd like to clarify the location. This may sound like a small detail, but basically, is the sign on, I'll call it the right side or left side of the drive into the parking lot?
If you're coming in from, say, 23rd,
Yeah,
so you're like turning into the parking lot,
right.
My assumption is it's on the right-hand side. Of course, the applicant can confirm that too, but that's my assumption.
Okay. Is the applicant with us?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you want the,
Yeah, I'd like to.
right now? Okay.
Yeah, it was kind of hard to tell between the overhead and the artist's rendering exactly where it was.
Yeah. I know 3J is the consultant, so yeah, there we go. Perfect. There we go.
Mary, is that not a question that we should postpone towards the actual testimony piece when our applicant testifies? Are we
I can
jumping
wait.
ahead?
It's no problem.
I will defer that to Laura or Justin.
Could I continue? I have a couple more questions.
Please.
Okay. So words matter, and I was somewhat hung up on the word undo. And so I looked up the definition of undo. And, one of the definitions out there is it's unwarranted or inappropriate because excessive or disproportionate. And I think that much of what I read and what I heard is an argument that the high school can continue to do its work without this sign. And I would agree. I would think that, the high school could continue to do its work even if, for whatever reasons, computers and the internet were banned, and we could go back to textbooks and lined paper. So I'm reading into the recommendations for disapproval, undo being, the school can do its job. And I would contend that this sign is trying to enhance the way they do their job so that they can communicate in several different forms because, they got a diverse population and they're trying to get it across in different ways. I understand the reason for the restraint in the city code, and I am not a proponent of electronic signs. All you got to do is go up and down 99 to say, gee, there's a lot of bad stuff here. But at the same time, I guess I would say, I see this as more of an unintended consequence maybe of that regulation.
Commissioner Massey, is this a question to staff, or
you're right, I'll stop.
Are you rendering an opinion?
I'll stop. Yeah, okay. Good point.
You're making good points.
Yeah, I'm going to make them again.
Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Heemner, you've been so polite.
Well, thank you. As the old man in the sea on this panel, and to our two planners. Now, I've been around for a long time, and I was on the DLC, and I may have been on there in 2006, but I remember a time that we did pass a sign code allowing electronic sign for the football field. Is my memory correct, or did we not look at that?
That did not come up on our end for staff. I'm not sure if the distinction is that it's being used solely for the purpose of the school versus being out for public consumption. But yeah, I don't know. Let me do some research.
Okay, and I could be totally wrong, and maybe, the applicant may not. So, okay, that was my question, is that I seem to remember going through this process for the football field, and I think there is an electronic reader board. If somebody that drives by there more than I do remembers that there is an electronic reader board out there by the football field, I think, right? Up top. But I might be wrong. So, all right, thank you.
Any other commissioners with questions? Commissioner Sherman, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Losfeld. Mary, I was just curious, it seems like there's some uncertainty on the category for kind of critical and essential buildings. Do we, or does the city have kind of an inventory of what is or is not? I think some quick internet searches on my own, it appears this is a designation that kind of comes out of the state from kind of an emergency response perspective. So it might not even be a local function, and we might not have that, but can you help us understand what we do or do not know about other Category 4 critical and essential buildings in our community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we as planning staff aren't aware of any others. That being said, our emergency person, gosh, I can't remember her title now, who works on emergency issues with the city may know more than me. I did talk to her briefly about this Category 4 designation because I didn't know much about it as well. And she wasn't aware of any others. That doesn't mean that there aren't in Milwaukie, but we don't have a list that I'm aware of at the city.
Okay. Thanks. I appreciate that. I was also trying to find a list online and couldn't really find anything readily, at least. Just maybe a quick follow-up question. I noted in some of the written testimony that was submitted, there was some reference to comments about the city and the school district maybe working together to figure out what could go on signage. And I was just curious, I didn't see anything in the application around, like, is there talk around setting up an IGA to, get the city some access to posting messages itself on the sign, or is it solely kind of under the school district's purview? And I don't know if you have any more context on that. It seems like that would be a public benefit if the city was able to get some of its own messaging out on said sign. And so I think that's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And a similar question I had for Brenna, who's our emergency contact with the city, or emergency management person, I think is her title. But she does not have any current IGA, intergovernmental agreement with the school district at this time. In terms of kind of working with them, I'm sure that could be something that could be in the future. In terms of a condition, if that's what you're thinking of for this sort of proposal, I think Justin would have some heartburn over that because it's not something that currently exists today. So you're adding a condition to something that we don't really know what it is exactly. Yeah, so I'll just add that 2 cents there. I had very similar questions.
I think the idea that she's getting at, this is Justin Garricky, city attorney. The idea that she's getting at is it's difficult to condition something on a negotiation for some sort of IGA. That negotiation may or may not fail. So we might be back in the same boat. It'd be different if we had something like that in our pocket now. But I would also point out that a public benefit is not a decisional criteria, a piece of criteria for determining whether or not the sign's allowed. So, it kind of would shoehorn it. It would make it sound like a really great public process, but we're still stuck with the code language that this application is being put through.
Thanks, Justin. I appreciate that. It might be a special and unusual circumstance, though, but we could discuss kind of the.
Well, I don't think the staff report has a problem with the special circumstance of the building being designated as an emergency. I think the applicant, I don't want to speak for staff, but I think the applicant has made that. I think what we're working on now is, and to Massey's point, we're really honing in on the undue and unnecessary hardship piece, whether or not the applicant has met that burden.
Okay.
But we can certainly talk about the other criteria if you feel warranted once we get to deliberations.
And I just, Chair Losfeld, if I may, I've got one last question. Great, thanks. All for decorum today, I guess. I guess it was in the kind of the recommended findings in, I'll just simplify and say 5.1, page 13, kind of the packet. It's kind of the sub E, it's the last one. Granting of the adjustment will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, or material injurious to properties or improvements in the vicinity. I was just kind of curious, you kind of reading, Mary, through kind of the staff response and what currently exists here, talking about things like the applicant not listing hours of operation, the applicant not addressing any impacts of light shining into the multifamily building. Have those questions since this was drafted kind of been addressed, or do these remain kind of outstanding questions from the city's perspective or from staff perspective?
Good question. So there are some things that I can add that we do know now. From the applicant, I was told that the hours of operation would be 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Of course, they can confirm that as well, just in case I got that wrong. And then in terms of the lighting and its effect on the surrounding area, in particular the apartment complex across the street, I don't have additional information on that. They can probably align it. I'm also not an electrician or know a lot about how the light works on signs, and they can definitely illuminate that if they want to. No pun intended there. But yes, they can probably talk about that more if they have that information as well. But I don't have that as staff.
Are there any other questions from the commission? Okay, let's move on to testimony. Have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items included in the meeting packet, Mary?
Oops, I muted myself when I didn't need to. As far as I can tell, we don't have any further testimony.
Okay, let's move on. Applicant testimony, comments from the applicant or representative. It looks like we have one.
We have a brief presentation, if I could share my screen.
Yes, go for it.
All right. Good evening. My name is Mercedes Sarah with 3J Consulting. I'm the planning consultant representing North Clackamas School District. Representatives from the North Clackamas School District and Milwaukie High School are here with me tonight as well. We'd like to thank staff and the Planning Commission for their time this evening, and staff for the staff report and presentation. The North Clackamas School District is proposing a sign variance to allow for the placement of an electronic reader board sign at Milwaukie High School. The proposed sign will be located at the Southeast 23rd and Southeast Willard Street intersection. It is east of the new parking lot. You can see a little bit better on this screen with the improvements shown. This is an intersection that's heavily traveled by students, parents, and teachers. Electronic reader board signs are used at high schools throughout the North Clackamas School District, including both Rex Putnam High School and North Clackamas High School. The reader board signs allow for information to be provided quickly, efficiently, and accurately to the student body using multiple languages. Within the staff report, there were 4 key issues identified by staff as variance criteria not met by the proposed sign. We submitted a letter into the record addressing each of these issues and would like to address them tonight as well. The first issue raised: how other high schools in the district use electronic reader board signs to help disseminate information to those without regular internet access. How is a non-electronic sign that can still disseminate information for those without regular internet access different than this proposal? So high schools use an electronic reader board sign to announce dates and times for theater productions, music concerts, sporting events, and other events that are open to the public, in addition to emails and newsletters that are sent via email or hard copy to students. Schools do not maintain lists of community members or former students, so this information is not sent out to members of the community who may want to attend these events. An electronic sign is limited in space to how many magnetic, or a non-electronic sign is limited in space to how many magnetic letters can fit on the sign, whereas electronic reader board signs can rotate through several messages by programming. High schools are active places with many events happening during the same week. A static sign creates issues for the school in determining which activities get posted and which get left out, which creates inequities. The second issue raised in the staff report was that the applicant does not explain why these types of signs are considered essential by North Clackamas School District in comparison to other forms of communication, such as emails, e-newsletters, and non-electronic communications to parents. Milwaukie High School not only serves 1,100 students, but it is an integral part of the community. We rely on a variety of communication methods to meet the varying needs of our parents, students, and community. A reader board sign allows messaging to go out quickly in a case of emergencies, and a static message board requires a staff member to go and physically change the board, unlocking the cover, spell out the new message, and fix it to the board. This is not efficient nor safe, especially in an emergency. The principal relies on many different forms of communication. Emails are just one, but do not get shared with the public. Engaging with the community is an essential function to the school. We want the community to see the school as a resource and a source of pride. It is difficult to do that when they are unaware of activities or important information. The third issue raised in the staff report: other schools in Milwaukie have residential underlying zones, and the applicant does not explain why denying this proposal is unique to Milwaukie High School or results in undue or unnecessary hardship as compared to other schools in Milwaukie. It is not clear if other schools in Milwaukie also have the emergency designation or some sort or why Milwaukie High School is more likely to need an electronic sign than other schools. Milwaukie High School is an emergency community shelter in times of natural disaster, and portions have been built to serve as a Category 4 essential critical building. In the case of the major earthquake, electrical, telephone, and cell phone service may not be available. However, an electronic reader board powered by a generator would provide essential information to the Milwaukie community, including direction to those looking for food, shelter, and services. The approval of the adjustment would allow an electronic reader board at Milwaukie High School, a critical essential building, is only applicable to one site in the city, as it is the only public high school in the city limits with this designation. In answer to your previous question, the Category 4 was established when the school was remodeled. The final issue raised is the applicant does not show how the school cannot function undue or unnecessary hardship properly due to the lack of this type of sign in comparison to previous years when non-electric signs was used. In 2006, Milwaukie High School was granted an electronic sign by City Council, but it was never built and the school continued to function without an electronic sign. What is different about the situation now than before? When the City Council approved the electronic sign in 2006, plans were started to find the financial resources to purchase and install the sign. However, the recession hit and North Clackamas School District was forced to lay off 25% of its staff. Resources were obviously needed in other areas. It has taken well over a decade to recover from the economic hit. While the school continues to function, it has done so in many years with bare bones in staffing and infrastructure. We do not want the school that just functions. We want a school that thrives and is a point of pride in our community. Without multiple ways to communicate and provide resources to the community, the school's goal to become a community resource is limited. We'd like to thank you for your time tonight, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Other testimony?
Let's see, I've got another hand raised.
Okay.
Yes. Cecilia. Oh, my screen. Hold on. There we go.
Chair, I believe Mr. Massey had maybe a question for the applicant, and I have one as well.
We have a little more applicant testimony, I think, as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Just following the prompts here.
Hello, my name's Cecilia and I'm a current sophomore at MHS. And there are some points that I'd like to talk about how this electronic sign could really help in the function of Milwaukie High School. The first point is that in Milwaukie High School, we have multiple clubs and extracurricular activities. So most of those clubs rely on social media to get all those messages out. However, not everyone has social media that they can access that would allow them to gain that information. And by having an electronic sign, it would be very helpful for not only students on campus, throughout their school day, where they can just see something that tells them, hey, today's a football game and here's where it is. But it could also be, like it was previously stated, that the location of the sign would be in a location where parents and students can travel through and they can gain all that information, as well as other community members in Milwaukie. It would also create equal publication for all the clubs that we have in our school. And the electronic messages would also help with the issues that some families have of not being or not having access to electronics, which would allow them to receive things such as emails or e-newsletters, etc. And it would also be portrayed, or it could be portrayed in multiple languages, so that it would also raise the audience in which all those messages would reach. And since Milwaukie High School is the only high school in Milwaukee city limits, I think it's very important for like the Milwaukee community to recognize that Milwaukie High School is a resource. And again, in events of emergencies and in other events where Milwaukee would like the community to collaborate with us, it would be more efficient than to, let's say, create posters or flyers, etc., which would just not be as efficient as having the sign where people would be able to travel through. And in general, it would just create more information or relay more information to the Milwaukee community. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. Mary, are there others? Anybody raising their hand out there in the audience?
No.
At this point, questions from the commissioners for the testimony and support. Chair Massey, you went off mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, can I just get the answer to that one question about the clarification on the location?
Right. So it is east of the driveway as you're entering. So it would be closer to the high school than the driveway.
So is it right there where the existing stone sign is?
Right there, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on to testimony in opposition? Commissioner Huebner?
Yeah, if Mercedes can answer this, or Cecilia, do you know how much it would burden the school district in extra costs by having to maintain letters, hire an employee to go out and go change those letters, and the risk factors that are taken into changing those letters?
So I don't know if someone else from the district might be able to answer this question more thoroughly on the operations. I could call on potentially Cindy if she is available. I'm not sure about the operational cost for changing the letters.
1 second. I can bring in Cindy.
Good evening. Thank you for letting us join this evening. I don't know that I have exact costs of that, Commissioner Huebner, but in our elementary schools that have the magnetic boards, it's typically part of the custodian's responsibilities. Sometimes it's a PTA volunteer. But if you drive by any particular school very often, and I know you do, they don't get changed very often. It's maybe once every 3 to 4 weeks, just because it is a time commitment. Sometimes you don't have all of the letters you need to spell out everything. In particular, in a second language other than English, it'd be quite difficult to get some of those characters and some other things and meet all of those requirements. So I don't have an exact answer to you. It's typically done, like I said, at an elementary level as part of staff current duties. But it's not a very efficient use of their duties.
Thank you, Cindy. Commissioner Sherman, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just kind of following on that question. How often is the electronic kind of sign proposed to kind of switch from one message to another? Because I assume it can kind of rotate. So is there any thought on like how many messages a day might also be up on the sign, or maybe examples from some of the other schools in the district?
Sure, I can address that. So I was principal at Rex Putnam when we installed that existing sign that's there. And we typically wouldn't do more than 3 or 4 messages in any given day because it's at the end of a long driveway. And you want to be able to make sure that parents and students and buses coming down can see all of those messages rotate and not stop and sit in front of it. So you can program it in such a way that you can stretch out the seconds. You can have one just being there. And it's just like a ticker tape. It just goes across. And to address a concern earlier, I never once received a complaint from any neighbors about the illumination from that type of a sign. It is not the kind of sign that you do see on some of those areas in McLaughlin, certainly not the Las Vegas style. These are not illuminating pictures and flashing all different kinds of colors. It's one color. It'll either be that gold amber color or a red color, and it doesn't flash. It just simply rotates like a ticker tape.
It's just kind of a follow-up question. So it would be impractical to have an employee out there changing the sign 3 times, 4 times a day.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think we tried to address this in our letter response. A high school is very unique and different than even a middle school, and certainly different than an elementary school in a variety of ways. But in particular, in any given week in a high school, you have 2, 3, sometimes 4 or 5 events happening in any given week in a typical, not in a non-COVID high school year. But when you're the principal and you have to decide, do I promote the band concert this week or do I promote the soccer game or do I promote the art club meeting? And you have to make decisions, and that doesn't feel good. And it leaves some families out, it leaves some kids out. And typically the high flyer things get posted, more things like football because it involves more people. And we're trying to really, really elevate all of our students and all of our activities in our school. And that's been a goal of Carmen Gilman, the principal. She's here also, by the way, listening in. And so if you have any questions for her, I know she can address those.
And just maybe 2 more questions if I have the floor. And just to maybe put a fine point on it, Cindy, would it be an undue hardship to try and rotate that sign?
You know, like Commissioner Massey, I also looked up the term because it's unclear what that exactly means. It can mean different things in different contexts, but it certainly does feel like an undue hardship to us on the school end. It certainly does to a principal who's trying really, really hard to increase her communication with families and students. And this is one obstacle that's in her way, where she could simply sit at a computer or a staff member can sit at a computer and program something in, and it can be up within 2 minutes. This is a hindrance to the operations of our school.
Just to add, sorry,
please.
if I could add to what Cindy said, just work this in. District-wide, I believe the school district did send out 1,700 hotspots to students who did not have internet access during COVID. So that's a big hindrance for students to not have internet access and not be getting those messages that might be sent through email.
Thanks. And I just also wanted to kind of confirm, it sounds like Milwaukie High School is the only Category 4 essential critical building in the district's portfolio in the city limits of Milwaukie. Is that correct?
Correct. In the city of Milwaukie, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Kashrabadi?
Yes, thank you very much, Cindy. Thank you for being here. Mercedes as well. I appreciate everyone's testimony. Cecilia, thank you very much for your testimony as well. So just a question, Cindy. So would you say that the undue hardship is really an equity or hardship, right? Because if there's students that don't have internet, if that signboard is able to post messages in multiple languages, it seems like that would be really the undue hardship would be the equity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That is one of our largest goals district-wide, but particularly, I know it's one of Principal Gelman's big goals is equity. And this, as I said earlier, it's a barrier, and it means some of our students and families don't get the same information as others.
Thank you.
Okay, if no other commissioner has questions, I have one of my own. Mercedes or Cindy, thank you for your time. I have just a question. If you could provide any additional information about how the designation of Category 4, maybe who has made that declaration, when, and how is the new construction of the building or the infrastructure for this sign in particular different than any other high school that is not a Category 4 because of this special designation? Can you just try and expand upon that piece?
I might ask Ron Stewart to come into the meeting, or Kevin Moisen, our project manager. They have a little bit more information on the construction than I do. Or I can speak on behalf of texts I'm getting from Ron Stewart. Oh, Ron's there. There we go.
Yeah, I just promoted them.
Hi there. Good evening. My name is Ron Stewart. I'm the Senior Director of Capital Projects. And I believe one of the questions was who made the determination, or how was the determination made of the Cat 4 designation for the commons, cafeteria, kitchen areas of the high school. And as a structural engineer, we purposely built it and had it amenities put on that would support a Cat 4 emergency shelter. And our structural engineer is the one that made that designation and then designed it accordingly, and it was built accordingly. What was the other question?
Is anything, I'm familiar with Category 4 in terms of seismic, is the infrastructure of this sign anything in particular special because of that Category 4 designation? Someone mentioned maybe Mercedes, a generator backup for the sign. Is that?
Right. Yes. We have a massive generator with a huge fuel supply that will operate the kitchen equipment, walk-in freezer, walk-in refrigerator, and that portion of the school. In addition, it's the only school that has the generator backing up the reader board if it's approved, this electronic sign.
Okay, so that is contingent on approval of this variance, Ron.
Well, yeah, if there's no electronic sign, we wouldn't run a
sure.
Operate
Okay.
by generator.
Okay, I think that takes care of my question. Thank you, everybody. I think if no other commissioners have questions, I'm seeing no hands raised. We will move on then to any member of the audience who may be speaking in opposition. Mary, please raise your hand to be recognized.
I don't have anyone raising their hand.
Okay, and then I'll ask for neutral testimony. Do we have anybody who in the audience would like to raise their hand, be recognized for neutral testimony?
No hands.
Okay. Does any member of the Planning Commission, I think we kind of move on from neutral testimony into rebuttal at this point, Mary. So does the applicant have any response? There was no negative, no neutral, so I'm going to move on from that too, Mary. Just kind of moving through this. So I'm going to close the public hearing. That sounds like the right next step. So public testimony portion of this hearing, file VR-2021-002, the Milwaukie High School sign variance, is now closed. Let's go into discussion by the commissioners. Who wants to get started? Sure, Commissioner Sherman, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Losfeld. I really appreciated the presentation, and I think I appreciated the Q&A kind of more than anything. I feel like it was helpful, and I wish some of the information that we discussed had kind of been included in kind of the original proposal. I guess I'll say that I think I'm sympathetic to the request for the sign, and I also, I think, understand, especially kind of in the existing kind of findings, some of the challenges we might face and might need to just continue this so that we can kind of revise and think about how we don't necessarily set a concerning precedent around kind of the community service use kind of designation. So how we wouldn't approve something here that then would allow churches, hospitals, et cetera, to kind of open the door for lots of signs in the city. And I really do think that it might be through this category for essential critical building kind of designation. But I think we also might need more time to kind of understand what that is, understand whether or not there's more buildings like that that are kind of designated within our community. So that's just kind of my own kind of take. It does seem like there is a benefit to the sign, but we might need to spend a little bit more time kind of looking at this, especially with some of this newer information, and thinking about findings to support what we've heard, as well as how we might focus it more on that Category 4 function. Those are some of my early thoughts.
Okay. Commissioner Massey?
Thank you. One of the things that struck me is that I think that we have to have some level of concern about precedent, but I don't think we need to be paralyzed by precedent. If we're going to make a modification to the existing rules and regulations, I guess one of the things that I would say is I think that high schools are different from middle schools and grammar schools, in that they have a much larger population. They quite frankly have a larger, I think, connection to the broader community because they have so many facilities that the broader community comes to in the way of athletic fields and gymnasiums and performing arts spaces and that kind of thing. And so I do see them being, different from the other schools in that regard. I will just hit this again. I know I went out of turn early, but I just want to hit these points again. Is that I think that this is a burden to the school, and we can get into the discussion of undue, and I think that the staff tries to portray undue as being, well, this doesn't prevent the school from doing its job. I just think that that's not a good comparison, because I think the undue is a hindrance to them doing the best job that they can. And so, I just think that any organization is always looking for multiple ways to communicate to, their community, their audience, their stakeholders. And this is one way that high schools, everywhere do this. And, that we've talked in this forum about the challenges of engaging the citizenry, and we're always looking for multiple venues to do that. And so, I kind of take that to heart, and that they're trying to do the same kind of things that the Planning Commission and the City Council are trying to do as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Massey. Commissioner Khoshrowbadi?
Yes, thank you. Just to carry on or add on to what Commissioner Massey was saying as well, because my thoughts the same thing. As far as the precedent, I'm not too concerned about a blitz of sign variances coming in or sign adjustments coming in. I'm just looking at from the school standpoint, and I do understand the way the code is written. However, to carry on with what Commissioner Massey said, there is a hindrance. The school is functioning, but I think the hindrance isn't really on the school. I think the hindrance falls on the children of the school, because the kids who don't have the ability to receive those social media messaging or those other types of messaging, or ones that speak other languages, the hardship falls on them more than the school, because the school is going to still do their messaging. It's the students that are going to have to somehow receive that messaging in one form or another. So, maybe this forces our hand to define that undue hardship or to, as Commissioner Sherman was saying, continue the discussion. But I mean, we're talking about 15 years now, and the school's been through so much, and those kids have been through so much in the last year. I think making it more difficult for them, is a precedent I would rather avoid than the precedent of a blitz of sign adjustments, in my opinion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Huebner?
So I'm doing Vice Chair's Edge's job here, because I'm sitting here looking at the criteria and trying to figure out ways to wiggle this thing through, right? And I'll tell you why. And I think that the changing of the letters is actually an unfair process to the school. It limits the amount of messaging that they can do. It actually adds to the functionality of somebody else's job that can be easily done electronically. It is an undue hardship, and that is not what the sign ordinance is meant to do, right? The sign ordinance is meant to be able to get messages out, because there's a better way to get messages out, and it's less and cheaper to be able to do an electronic. This sign ordinance actually does increase the undue hardship onto the applicant. So that would, I'm working on MMC 14.32.030, right? So that was my A. So my B is that, are there exceptional circumstances? Well, so just to clarify what a category 4 building is, okay? It means that it can live up to a Cascadia earthquake, right? And that it is designated as a safe place for people to go and gather. So high schools, hospitals, those kind of buildings, they're built to this standard. So you're built to this standard to be a category 4 anyway. So that will designate them as a category 4. So now what they're saying is that, hey, look, we are going to put a generator on this reader board to be able to get emergency, so that when people come to our category 4 site, that we will still have the electronics there, which makes that in an exceptional or an extraordinary circumstance or condition, to the property, that it is a category 4, and that they are going to ensure that their sign is going to be workable, readable, and adjustable to quick and current changing conditions. And then C, the strict or literal interpretation or enforcement of the specified regulation would deprive the applicant of privileges. It does. And it's because it deprives them of equity and inclusion. And I think when these laws were written, that these things weren't taken into account. But I think it does deprive the high school of equity and inclusion of all students and all people, regardless of their race, religion, ethnicity, or the language that they speak. And then my D, that the granting of the adjustment will not constitute a grant of special privileges, inconsistent. And that's because they're a category 4 building, and that they are a high school, right? That their messaging is more provided to not only the community itself, because it is providing the community with programs and events, and that the high school is certainly integrated into the community, but it's also because it's a category 4 building, which makes it an emergency shelter when the time is needed. And then for E, that granting of the adjustment will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare. Well, we can just say that it is detrimental because it's a category 4 building, and because it reduces equity and inclusion in our community. So that is how I would make the adjustments to these cases. So I think that it's actually, with that thinking of the criteria, that we could consider and make the findings respect, and that those circumstances are enough for granting the sign ordinance adjustment. How was that? I tried.
That was Commissioner Edge would be very proud. I see a hand raised again, Commissioner Sherman.
Yeah, thank you. I think Commissioner Hemer, I think much of what you said, I mean, I think there's certainly some polishing that would need to be done, but I think some of that resonates. I would be curious to hear from staff kind of in reaction to that. It seems not to necessarily take the chair's role here, but it seems that there might be the votes. But I think there is kind of the question of the legal justifications and whether that exists, and that's also maybe Justin's role to help us keep honest. And if we don't think that the findings can necessarily get there, maybe we just deny it and we let it move on its way to City Council appeals. But I'd just be curious to kind of hear reactions to that, given kind of the approval criteria that we have to work with.
Before we hear from staff, I'd like to just add my own 2 cents. So I appreciate the back and forth on this. My position would be on this that I have a defense against almost every piece that's been brought up at this point that I think is maybe a weakness in what's being argued. I think the only foundation here for potential approval is limited to the Category 4 designation. I think if Category 4 designation is the way in which we kind of craft our language. You think if you go into the requirements for building of Category 4 design, nothing will tell you that it requires a sign in which an electronic sign be located on the site in order to appropriately, provide any kind of messaging or information to the public. Now, I think it makes quite a bit of sense that there be some kind of way to communicate with the public in the event of an emergency. But to the comment about high schools being different, I think that any school could make that argument. I think that's a little bit, maybe a weak defense. On the point of equity for students, again, I think that equity for students could apply to elementary schools as well. I think there's something to be said about many different aspects of community service, whether it's schools, churches, et cetera, that could begin to make that same argument. So I think if we're crafting language, I think we really have to be careful about what we're stating and how we're kind of limiting this. And then limits to the amount of change of messaging, being an undue burden to the high school. I really do think that anybody could make that characterization. And so there again, you just have to be willing to understand that in the future, any school would want to have one of these reader boards. There's reasons why the sign code limits them. And although this sign may not be one of those Las Vegas sign style, and I'm glad to hear that, the next project may be. And what is it that would stop any kind of project from bringing one of those to a residential neighborhood? So I guess my recommendation to the group would just be that we really try to hone in on the Category 4 nature of this project as the very clear path forward rather than any of those other pieces. And I would also recommend, I would actually continue this hearing because I feel we do not have enough evidence to support the Category 4. And I feel like that information needs to be brought forward in the application itself to make a defensible position for staff. So now, having said my piece, Laura and Mary, what do you all feel about what you're hearing from the group? And Justin?
I guess I'll just, reiterate more information is always helpful. for us as staff if we want to create defensible findings. I'll let Laura and Justin take the floor as well.
Chair Lisfeld, I would agree with all of those points that you made. I think it would be a good idea to continue the hearing so that we could continue to dig into this a little bit more and get some more questions answered and kind of try to understand more about the precedent. I think that you articulated very well that this could potentially open it up to churches and other schools and other community uses. And so we need to be very clear as to why that couldn't happen if we can make that case. So I do think it's an interesting tie to the category 4 and wanting to understand more about, are there other buildings in Milwaukie, not just schools, that are category 4, and could they make the same case? I don't know the answer to that question. So if there is one building in Milwaukie that's a category 4 building, then that starts to maybe give us a little bit more information to move forward with. But if there are 10 buildings in Milwaukie that are category 4, then I think that we have to look at what those are and what the implications for those signs might be.
My only comment, Chair Lisfeld, would be there's been several comments about not being scared of precedent setting and whatnot. And I will say that in staff discussions, that is a consideration that we look at. We want to use the code in a manner that is consistent, no matter who's applying for a sign or any other sort of variance. How we avoid precedent setting is by distinguishing an application. And I would agree with some of the comments that the chair has made on the distinguishing factor about the category 4 designation. I think in order for staff to develop, and I will defer to them 100%, but I think in order for them to develop findings that distinguish this application from other CSUs that may find themselves applying in the future, staff needs some additional information. And I think some dialogue between staff and the applicant could potentially get us there. I don't know. Some of these very questions that have been posed by Commissioner Sherman, by the chair, by staff, we asked ourselves when we were meeting about this application. So those would be my thoughts. I think continuing the hearing to potentially allow that dialogue to occur, that could maybe give some additional fruit to be carved out into some better findings that distinguish the application.
One follow-up piece on that I would have is I would also want staff to get in touch with this emergency chair or emergency personnel. And I believe, are they through the state or through the city or maybe both?
Sorry to interrupt, Chair, if I may.
Yep, go ahead.
It looks like, I think it's the State Resilience Office
yes,
is where a lot of this kind of lives. So I think whether that, probably the onus is on the applicant to maybe get in touch with the State Resilience Office, learn more about what, if any, other buildings are kind of designated here in the city, and in order to kind of provide that evidence.
So Mary and Laura, then would it be helpful for us to maybe itemize or kind of expand upon what information, what list we would want clarified? And maybe first there needs to be a vote of continuation. Vote of continuation, Laura. Getting a little bit of a head nod. Can I just get a quick look at anybody who would agree to a vote of continuing this hearing, maybe just by show of hand? So I'm getting 4. Okay, all commissioners are in support of a continuance. So let's just talk then. Let's start to itemize what pieces you all feel you need clarification on before you can render a vote. Who wants to get started? Maybe I'd ask Commissioner Sherman, since you started off with this category 4.
Yeah, Thanks, Chair Losfeld. Yeah, I definitely think the kind of understanding whether there are any other kind of public facilities within our jurisdiction that meet that Category 4 criteria. I found, kind of as we were talking, I found a report from 2013 that kind of talks about what could be in the Category 4. And, it is a large list: hospitals, fire rescue, a number of other things. I think it would just be really useful. Like, is this the only school that's Category 4 in our city? Because I think, again, that helps, to Justin's point, around that differentiation. So to me, I think is a fundamental thing. We need to really understand that fully. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
You're on mute, Laura.
I was just going to say, I think it's not just, is it the only school? I think they did answer that, but is it other facilities in the city as well? Yeah. Just to clarify.
Yeah.
And I just want to be clear, knowing that information, knowing that there's another list, how does that help you form an opinion on this particular piece? And just knowing that there are other buildings, does that impact you, or?
Well, and maybe it's a question, maybe this is a question for council, because it feels like if we had additional applications in the future that weren't schools, so if it was something else that was also a category, like how much of the schoolness of a Category 4 designation matters or doesn't matter? I guess maybe that's a question that either staff or council could provide some guidance on.
Can I also say that each application stands on its own merit, and you can't use past decisions as a rendering point as well. So I think that by going out and searching for a list of Category 4 buildings, what you're saying is, well, we're worried about the precedent and you're not so much worried about this building. What I would like to focus on is why Category 4 makes this application, right, unique to be able to have this sign, right? I mean, and that's really the question that you are after. I don't think that you need to go around and find every Category 4 building. I think that's setting up really actually, hey, we don't want to set a precedent, but we don't know how big the precedent is. I think that's a lousy way to do this, if you ask me. I think that's unfair to the applicant, and it's unfair for this commission to make a decision on that broad base. So what I would say is, my question is does the Category 4 designation, right, does it make this a unique enough situation that it creates circumstances for granting the adjustment, right? And so the idea is that they have a Category 4 building, which is potentially a saving or gathering place of lives, and that this reader board is an essential tool to the communication of getting that message out, and it's easy and changeable to be able to get that communication out, right? I mean, you got to tie the two together, and that's how I would look at this. I don't know if we need to go around and find every Category 4 building in town. I think that's setting us up in a bad way, and I think we should keep it unique to this application. So I think that we should ask our resilience manager here in the city. Maybe we could talk to the school district and the fire department on how they designate these and how important communication is, and how valuable it is to have a working communication board when an emergency happens, and then we can use that Category 4.
The only thing that I would say to counter that, Commissioner Himner, is that the conditions of exceptional and extraordinary might be illuminated by the fact that they are extraordinary as an example of only one in the whole city, to the list of other potential sites. I think we need to hear directly from the officer And this may be because I understand that the resiliency officer is only new within the last several years. And so to what language they may have, or to what may be declared already about signage, I know very little about that, but if there's something they can say to that end, that would be very helpful at this point. I think if we ask for the fire or the police or anyone else to weigh in, they're likely going to say, you know, in support of messaging to the community. Is there anything else that anybody else would want to hear or would need clarified? Any other commissioners?
I would also state that I think that in these days and ages, equity and inclusion is certainly a circumstance that we can use to justify things.
So I just need you to dig in on that, because not that I disagree with you, but that you got to be specific.
And to that point, I just don't see how that kind of clearly fits in the approval criteria. I mean, I think if we were like sitting on city council and we were having this conversation, like very clearly kind of comes in, but with the code that we kind of have here, I just don't necessarily see that as well. But I think I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think I heard you hone in on that for C, the strict or literal interpretation of enforcement of the specified regulation would deprive the applicant of privileges enjoyed by the owners of the property. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you have to, and I guess I don't know if you have to, if you only have to pick one letter, right, in this to make it all pass. I was just trying to find, right, if you only need one letter or if you need all the letters.
You need all the letters.
So it might be hard to.
What did you say, Mary?
You do need all the letters.
All of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's important.
So if we want information back and we want to see positive findings to make this happen, and we need to find other justifications, I think that certainly the feelings of the high schoolers being the only one being made fun of not having an electronic sign in North Clackamas County is a fair privilege, right? Or you're taking away that privilege, especially the messaging that you can promote all clubs and all activities in a decisive and active way, and being able to put different languages on there. And so I think that can certainly be worked in to see if we cannot find a reason for category 4 to fall into that.
So what I'd like to do is ask the commission, let's put aside the conversation about category 4 and the clarification of that designation, and understand where the rest of you all sit relative to a defense for the other letters, as Mary is pointing out. So I'd like to just get a temperature read for, again, putting category 4 aside. Do you feel like the other elements of MMC 14.32.030 on page 11 through 13 can be defended by the applicant, by the application? In other words, I don't want to continue this hearing to get more information about category 4 when you don't believe that A, B, D, E have a foundation. And I just want to underline what Justin was saying about precedent, that we do need to be very clear and decisive, defensible about this response. Commissioner Sherman, go ahead. Sorry. You're on mute though.
Thanks. Could staff kind of help illuminate sub D, the granting of the adjustment will not constitute a grant of a special privilege inconsistent with the limitations on other properties classified in the same zoning district. I think I have some notes scribbled on most of the other ones, and I think with the first time I even read this, I scribbled a question mark next to it. So can you kind of help us understand kind of what this means as we're thinking about those kind of potential justifications?
Yeah, I also had to read it multiple times. So the way I was reading it is that it won't grant them special privilege that's inconsistent with what you would grant special privilege to another, say, community service use designation. I think that's how I was reading it. And I believe that's, Laura, you can confirm, or if that's also, it's worded, I agree, it's worded very confusingly.
Laura, if you want to weigh in on this, I think I could benefit from an example.
I guess I need a little bit more direction from Mary. I'm still like not 100% familiar with the code, and so I'm going to kind of lean on Mary here.
Yeah. So, yeah, let me see if I can maybe come up with a good example. So the community service uses are allowed to have larger signs than what is normally allowed in a residential zone because of that designation as a community service use, right? Because it makes sense. They have different needs and things that they're trying to portray to the public in comparison to a residential use, obviously, a hospital versus any sort of residential use. And so the way I'm reading it is that if you grant a community service use something that that you can't grant other community service uses, if that makes sense. So you have a hospital that's asking to have a larger, really big sign, and it has to go to Planning Commission because of the size of it. You can't, and say the sign, they want to have 2 of those. And in the code, it prohibits a community service use from having, say, more than 2 of these big, large signs, right? So if you're asking for an adjustment and saying, we want 2 that as this community service use, is granting that second big sign that's not allowed without the adjustment, is that a special, is that defensible in the sense that another community service use wouldn't be able to ask for that as well? Like, that's the special granting of it, if that makes sense. So it's kind of going along how we're talking about trying to find things that are unique to the situation. Asking for 2 large signs, the applicant would have to state, these are the reasons why we need these special privileges and why granting another community service use doesn't meet these also special privileges, if that makes sense.
Okay. I think that helps a little. Chair Losfeld, to your question, as I was kind of looking through the approval criteria, independent of category 4, thinking about practical difficulty or unnecessary physical hardship, I think comparing between kind of what's allowed, the static sign, and then what they're asking for, which is the the electronic sign, multiple messages in a day. I think that thinking about that staff time kind of component and the undue hardship there, I think makes sense, as well as multiple languages also makes sense, and being able to maybe highlight the not as high profile student activities could also kind of fit there. I think with regards to sub B, exceptional extraordinary circumstances, clearly the Cat 4 could be here. I would also be curious, but I think another kind of key differentiator is this is our only high school, right? So we have other schools, we have charter schools, elementary schools, middle schools, but this is our only high school. And we might also be able to think about the size of the student population. I think it was mentioned over 1,000 students. We surely don't have over 1,000 students in our middle school or the other schools. So I think that might also be a place where we could differentiate. With regards to C, I think I would also go back to the one sign in a day or a week or a month versus multi-images. And I think to Commissioner Hemer's point, I think this is a strong place where there is that kind of equity focus, right? The ability to portray messages in other languages, to highlight, maybe the BIPOC student organizations and those types of things. I think
Commissioner Sherman, can I interrupt?
Please.
I think that, and everything that you're saying here, I think the category 4 piece has to come into play in every condition and every piece. I think that is the only definitive piece of information here that makes this unique. And I think you could successfully tie it into A through E on this application, and make it a very successful application that this commission could come back and, for all the reasons, equity under the lens of a category 4, all of the things that you're saying, I would just tag in category 4 and would likely be everything that we need. Do you think that can be done, or would you agree?
Me personally, I think I would agree with that. Now, I'd be curious to hear from our fellow commissioners.
Just by looking at it, yeah, you can apply the category 4 to each one. I mean, just reading through it. Just looking at it, I think that would be able to do it. I mean, if you think that would make it stronger to stick to just that, because obviously we could include the other things as well very easily, considering the over a year that we've basically lived in an emergency, and there has been a lot of issues with equity, all the way down to the vaccines. So you can tie that in, but if you think that's going to make it stronger, and that'll be the quickest way for us to be able to get the school what they need as a Cat 4, then yeah, I'm totally fine with that.
Commissioner Macy?
I think that we could incorporate this into all 5 subsets as well, but I wouldn't abandon, what I'll call the amplifying context. I would not leave that out. I just wouldn't, just leave it alone at Cat 4, because I think we do have good supporting context to build a case.
Agreed. And I actually see this as potentially setting a great precedent for the community, for hopefully future category 4 buildings to incorporate a system that could more easily message and provide this kind of widely distributed messaging to the community in the case where we need more community resources like this building in order to serve us during an emergency event. So I do actually think this is a positive direction. I think it's asking the applicant to come back with some greater detail about category 4. And I do think, again, getting some information back from the state about their recommendations for signage would be supporting their making their application even stronger. Commissioner Heemner, do you have anything to add to that? Because I think we've heard from everybody now a couple of times. I want to make sure.
No, I'm good. If I believe that Commissioner Massey makes a very good point that we can drive this thing with the category 4, but even our subsets of reasons are still good justifications for this as well.
Absolutely. I think they definitely tie into the category 4, the need for a category 4. All of those components do. Okay, Laura and Mary, we've talked a lot. Do you have enough information to go off of?
Chair, may I ask, is there a date certain that we need to have this meeting for? Or can I just make a motion for a continuation?
Yeah, I would say make a motion for continuation. We probably, I'm not thinking that we would be able to turn it around fast enough for the next meeting on the 27th, which I know we don't have anything scheduled, but I'm going to talk to you about that. So I would propose looking at the May 11th meeting, I believe is our next meeting.
Yeah.
After the 27th.
Do you want me to make that as a date certain? I don't know if we're up against the clock or something like that that's going to make this difficult, or.
We have until June 25th for 120 days. So we have time.
May 11th seems like it gives the applicant the best possible situation to provide. Okay, Commissioner Heemner, can we hear?
So I'd like to make a motion to continue the hearing until May 11th for VR 2021-002. Looking for information from the applicant as discussed by the commission.
I have
I'll
a
second that
motion. A motion has been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All commissioners are in favor of continuing the hearing. All right. Okay, let's see the appeal rights then. The decision per MMC 19.311.6 is a conditional approval of a preliminary plan development. We are moving on. It is not an appealable decision. The applicant must, within 18 months, file a final development plan and program, which will be reviewed as a Type 5 land use application by both the Planning Commission and the City Council as the final local decision-making authority. Next on the agenda is a public hearing on Providence supportive housing conditional use. The public hearing on Providence supportive housing conditional use is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider application number CU-2021-001. The purpose of the application is to request a conditional use on a property located at the vacant lot on the corner of Llewellyn Street and 34th Avenue. The applicant has the burden of proving the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning, subdivision, ordinance, comprehensive plan, any applicable municipal code provisions, and the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask that the staff cite the zoning ordinance sections where the criteria can be found. Mary?
All right, so we have 19.905 conditional uses and 19.1006 type 3 review.
Okay. All testimony and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow a response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party with standing may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons with standing are those who submit comments or testify today. Conduct of hearing. We will recognize those persons submitting testimony. Please state your name and email for the record so that they may be entered into the minutes. Before I go on, Mary, do we have anybody in attendance?
We have applicants. in attendance, but that's all that I see.
Okay. Please state your name and email for the record so that they may be entered into the minutes. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and information not relevant. The moderator may mute you if disruptions occur. If additional comments or evidence are provided by any party, the commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow parties reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuation or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed by the applicant. Conflicts of interest. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from the hearing? I see no raise of hand. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest by raise of hand? I see Commissioner Himner.
Yeah, so I don't know if the Providence Hospital is connected to the Providence Supporting Housing, but in 2020, in the late fall, the Milwaukie Museum and I personally went and asked them for funding to help support the Ardenwald Adventure, which is a walk around the Ardenwald neighborhood that will be soon be available on the Milwaukie Museum website. And they did participate. They gave us $300. I also wanted to recognize that that Mr. Gossage, who is interested in this property because he's kind of neighboring, has been emailing Mary and certain other individuals about a Providence thing. And I did not read the emails because I just assumed that they were going to be in the public testimony for this. But then I didn't see them in there, and then I opened them up, and it was about a different subject, about a different water main kind of thing there. So I just wanted that out in the open, that I recognize the fact that that had happened. Mary can expand more on it. I just briefly looked at it, and so I just want to let you know that there's kind of communication back and forth, but I was trying to avoid it, but I ended up doing it because I thought it was going to be part of this. So,
Mary and Laura, do you have anything specifically to conflict of interest?
It was just Greg was CC'd on an email conversation regarding utility easements and not regarding the criteria for this application. So
how about
I
the
don't see
exchange of funds? Do you think that's a relevant conflict of interest?
I'll defer to Laura.
I'll defer to Justin on that.
I was going to say, I have a feeling this is going down.
The chain?
Or up. I don't know if it's up or down, but it's not kicking the can. Commissioner Himner, can you repeat your conflict of interest potentially?
The museum got $300 from Providence Hospital for a project that we are doing, which I am directly related to the Milwaukie Museum. I did not personally receive it, but the organization that I did, I just wanted that to let that be known out to the public.
Okay. I believe I don't believe that rises to a conflict because the organization received the money. I don't think there's any pecuniary benefit that would benefit you or anybody in your household. What is your position with the museum?
I am vice president, but I am unpaid.
I don't think there's a conflict there because I think you, under the ethics rules, you wouldn't be receiving any pecuniary benefit from that donation, and it went to the organizations. So. But you can declare it as a potential conflict. That does not prevent you from participating.
Okay. I'm going to move on then. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report on any ex parte contacts? I'm seeing no raise of hand. Will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to the hearing please raise their hand? I'm seeing all but myself raise their hand. So that would be 4 commissioners. Did any of those commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or know anything different from what is indicated in the staff report for this application? No raise of hand. And does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission? Mary, will you let us know if a hand is raised to be recognized?
No hand.
Seeing no hand, we'll move on. Does any member, we'll move on to the jurisdictional issues then. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? And Mary, please let me know if anybody raises a hand.
No hands.
Okay, Mary, you're on. We are now
Okay.
proceeding to the staff report.
All right. Okay. So I'm here to talk about the conditional use review, CU 2021-001 for the vacant lots on the corner of Llewellyn Street and 34th Avenue. All right, so the location, as I mentioned, is on the corner of Llewellyn and 34th Avenue. It's currently vacant. There are 3 existing tax lots in the proposed site area, which totals to about 0.31 acres or around 13,504 square feet. And in terms of the zone, it is zoned R3, so residential zone. You can see directly adjacent to the west is general mixed use, and then the surrounding area in general is also zoned R3 as well. In terms of the types of uses that are around there, to the east, it's fairly single-family residential uses. There is a multifamily residential building to the southeast of the site area. Providence Hospital is directly to the west. And then to the south, you can see is, or you can't see, but it's a combination of single-family residential and commercial office uses. So the proposal for the site is a little bit complicated in terms of the phasing because of the type of building that it's going to be. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit so that there's less confusion as we go forth about the proposal. So in total, it kind of consumes both the R3 area zone, and let me go back, and then the blue box area is also zoned general mixed use. It's both are owned by Providence, both areas, and they're going to kind of combine together into one bigger project. The issue comes into play is that it's zoned 2 different zones. And so we're going to be talking solely about the parking lot that's happening in the R3 zone. And the reason we're doing it this way is for a couple of reasons. So the proposed building and project in general is for affordable housing for seniors, as well as clinic space for services for those seniors on the bottom floor. So it'll be a mixed use building, and then the parking lot in the R3 zone will work with that proposed affordable housing mixed use building. Because it's affordable housing, it needs to get funding from the federal government, and the applicant is currently applying for funding to have this proposal move forward. As part of their funding application, they have to prove that the application doesn't have any variances or any discretionary review that needs to go through Planning Commission, or they have to have that already done and approved to be able to add that as a checkbox on their funding proposal. So they've come to us to kind of start with that phase 1, where they're going to get conditional use, hopefully approval, or that's their goal, through Planning Commission with this parking space because of the R3 zone. And then you'll see on May 11th, you'll get a variance application for a 5th story addition to their proposed building, mixed use building. And that'll be for a building height variance. So they want to get those things taken care of, and hopefully they would like to get them approved, obviously, so that they can bring that to their funding application, which would give them better ability to get funding. The more points you get, the likelier of a chance you'll get funding. So that's kind of why they're doing it in this way. And unfortunately, because the funding hasn't been given yet, they don't have the money to kind of move forward with everything all at once. So they have to do it in piecemeal ways so that they can get the funding to then eventually in phase 3 do the whole building development review with the city. And the development review wouldn't require planning commission deliberation, which is why they're not coming to you at this point in time. So for the specific proposal we'll be talking about tonight, they're asking for a 17-space parking lot with 1 loading space, outdoor space to serve the development, the mixed-use building proposal. And the reason why it's a conditional use application is because any uses that are related to multifamily or commercial are considered conditional use in the R3 zone. So because the parking lot will be used for the mixed use building, which is residential and commercial, it gets designated into needing a conditional use approval to move forward. So that is why we're looking at it today. So in terms of key issues for this particular proposal, it's pretty simple. We just want to make sure that they're meeting the approval criteria for conditional use. And I have it all listed out here. I will not go over through each one piece by piece, but there are 7 approval criteria that are need to be met for the Planning Commission to consider approval of this conditional use. So I'll go through each one a little bit and talk more about how they're proposing to meet these approval criteria. So the first one is about the characteristics of the lot being suitable for the proposed use. The site itself, as I mentioned before, is about 0.31 acres, about 13,500 square feet. It's currently a vacant site, unimproved. And the proposed parking lot is not going to cover the entire lot. As you can see there on the right-hand side, there will still be large outdoor vegetated space as well. So the parcel will keep with some of that open space feel that already exists there today, and limit the impervious surface, the parking lot, to the northern part of the site. And also the reason why they've proposed it to the north is that the location of the driveway that you can see there that's going on to 34th is meeting our public access standards. So any new driveway needs to be 100 feet from an intersection. And so that's the most logical space to put the driveway. And therefore it makes sense to have the parking lot right off the driveway there and then north. So the proposed location is making sure that it's meeting all of the criteria that we have in our code, and to make it safe for safety at the intersection as well. So I jumbled these 3 criteria together because I think they're very similar. And the number 2 is talking about the operating and physical characteristics will be reasonably compatible and have minimal impact on nearby uses. The 3rd criteria talks about impacts and how they'll be mitigated to the extent practicable. And then the 4th is the proposed use will not have unmitigated nuisance impacts. So I'll talk about those kind of all together a little bit. In terms of the zoning for the site and the surrounding areas, it is a variety of uses are in the area. Obviously, you have the hospital to the west. You actually have commercial and residential to the south. To the southeast, you have multifamily, and then to the east, you have single family. And then to the north, directly north, is actually a historic property as well. So they can, as a historic property, have some designation to do residential or sometimes commercial if they wanted to do that as well. So there's a variety of uses that are allowed in the area. And so it's compatible to have a commercial and residential building within this area, a mixed use building, and the parking lot would serve the residential component of this building. And the parking lot, like I said, is going to solely be used for the residential portion of that mixed use building. So it'll be used for long-term parking and employees and visitors as well. And so it minimizes the amount of trips that will happen on 34th. And then the loading space will be used for the clinic. So for food deliveries, service deliveries, and trash. And then access for residential deliveries will be on the GMU side, kind of where the existing big parking lot is. So it'll be to the west. So the parking lot itself is going to try and keep with the street designation of 34th being mostly working with residential kind of traffic. And they're keeping to that by having that parking lot solely be for the residential uses of the mixed use building. They'll have additional parking. It'll be in the GMU area though as well. In terms of impacts and how they'll be mitigated, the proposed development does have a buffer to the neighborhoods by having that open space, especially at the intersection too, where a lot of pedestrian traffic would be. The proposal is not to have the parking lot fill the entire site, but to keep some of that open space and mitigate any sort of impacts of the new building to nearby uses. So it kind of creates a transition almost a little bit between the mixed use building, multi-story building, to the single family buildings that are to the east. So it creates that kind of little transition from lower density to higher density as well. The frontage on 34th and Llewellyn is currently unimproved as well. With this proposal, and that by what I mean unimproved is they don't have sidewalk or curb. It's kind of a bare street at the moment. And the proposal would actually improve that area so that they would be putting in sidewalks and making sure that pedestrian traffic was safe. If there were a need for bicycle improvements, that would also be there as well. And so it's mitigating any sort of potential impacts of possible increase in traffic, because it is going from vacant to some sort of development, by making sure that it's safer for people to be around there walking and biking as well. So they are making sure that that the proposal will be able to actually improve the conditions of that corner and the intersection and make sure that it is walkable for people in general. Also, so as I mentioned about the transition of the feeling, it is creating that kind of buffer by having, it separates the mixed use building by more than 100 feet from existing residential uses to the south, and then about 60 feet to residential uses to that east and southeast as well. So it's creating that transition, as I mentioned before. And then in terms of any unmitigated nuisance impacts, they acknowledge that the impacts to this particular proposal wouldn't be much different than impacts to other residential uses in the R3 zone. So for example, you could build row housing or other higher density housing in the R3 zone, and the traffic and kind of use of that parking lot would be similar to other impacts of residential uses if those three lots decided to redevelop as well. So they're acknowledging that. They also made sure that the loading area was set farther, let's see if I have, yeah, farther east. So it's farther away from where 34th is. And so any sort of noise impacts that could happen with loading, especially maybe garbage or things like that, is farther away from the residential areas than it is, than it would be if they placed it somewhere else, basically on the parking lot. So they're adjusting to make sure that, one, it makes sense to have the loading zone close by, but it also works to help kind of mitigate any sort of nuisance impacts that would happen with loud trucks or things like that needing to use the loading zone. So I'll go into the last three approval criteria here. And again, I clumped them together because I just thought it would be easier to articulate that way. The proposed use, number 5 is the proposed use would comply with all applicable development standards and requirements. The proposed parking lot meets all of our standards in the code. It's meeting our medium and high density residential zone standards in 19.302, the site design standards in 19.504, and the off-street parking and loading standards for 19.600. So it's meeting all of the development standards that we have if you're developing a parking lot and outdoor space within our code. In terms of making sure that the proposal is consistent with the comprehensive plan, yes, it's the parking lot itself will be used for the affordable housing building. It'll be used to help the residents be able to have close parking that is next to the building. In terms of our comprehensive plan policies, we have pretty, I listed them out in the staff report, so I won't go through all of them, but it meets quite a bit of our goals and policies related to housing, especially around equity, affordability, sustainability, and livability. So they're meeting proposals, or they're meeting policies in our comprehensive plan that we even recently just approved. And then in terms of adequate public transportation facilities and public utilities, it will go through, when it goes through the development review process, it will have to go through a transportation impact study as well. So any sort of mitigation that happens or comes forward because of that transportation impact study, they will address at that time. There's nothing in terms of this particular review that would trigger a transportation impact study. But as a whole proposal site, they will go through a transportation impact study, and they'll make sure that there's adequate amount of transportation facilities to meet the need for the proposed development. It also is located 1 block from 32nd, which has 2 bus lines. And then in terms of utilities, it's already serviced with with utilities in terms of power, gas, sewer, and stormwater as well. So there's number 7. And then in terms of public comments, we did receive 2 public comments over the last 48 hours. Both were in support of the proposal. One was by Elvis Clark, and then the other was by Mary and Jean Zarelli. Sorry. And like I said, they were both in support of the proposal. In terms of staff recommendation, we do recommend to approve the conditional use for the vacant lots on the corner of Llewellyn and 34th, which would result in a 17 space parking lot, 1 loading space, and then also the open space, which I didn't put there. But we also recommend to adopt the attached findings and conditions of approval, which we outlined as well. And then for you all, the Planning Commission, you have 4 options. You can approve the application subject to the recommended findings and conditions of approval. You can approve the application with modified findings and conditions of approval, which would need to be read into the record. And then you would also have the option to deny the application upon finding it doesn't meet the approval criteria for conditional use, or you can continue the hearing as well. So those are your 4 decision-making options. And then I will happily take any questions that you may have.
Okay, are there any clarifying questions from the Planning Commission? Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Huebner. Oh, you're on mute, sir.
Does this parking lot meet the minimum parking requirements for the amount of trips of the clinic and the building itself? Or is that going to be tied in with the building and it's going to tie together all that together, or how is that working?
Yeah, so no, they'll have multiple spaces for parking. So this is just one site, so it doesn't meet their need at this time. But that is their overall proposal will bring forth their parking recommendation as well. Yeah.
Good question. Any other questions for clarification? Seeing, hand raised. Commissioner Sherman, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Lowesfeld. I think I was trying to kind of understand similar things. And can you just help me kind of from a process, like it feels odd from a process perspective to get a parking lot before you get a building and before you get a transportation impact study, and we're going to approve a parking lot that will get approved, and conceivably a building could not get built as well. And I guess I I feel like I heard that, like in the staff report, it also mentions there isn't enough time to come before the Planning Commission with the building. But then I think I heard Mary, you say they will be coming with the building on May 11th. So can I just it feels like there's a lot of puzzle pieces that feel this isn't a regular planning process. So can we just help us understand the sequence of things? Because it feels odd to approve something that's that's tied to a building that we're not actually talking about.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. It is a unique situation that does not happen on a normal basis. The issue here is because of the funding proposal that you have to provide to the federal government, meaning that you have to come forth to the federal government with stating, if we get this funding, there will be no issues with something not getting approved that we are proposing to you. So the reason why they need to go through the conditional use process, and then what you'll get on May 5th is actually for a variance to a 5th story. So it's not, again, it still won't be for the full proposal. And in fact, the full proposal will never go to you all unless for some reason something drastically changes. It would meet the standards for the general mixed use zone. Hindering on, of course, approval on the conditional use side, then anything that's happening in the general mixed use is really only going to be up to a type 2, meaning that it goes to the planning manager for a decision because of that type of zone and what it allows. So the applicant needs to give certainty to the federal government saying, yes, we will be able to build what we are proposing to you because we have either it's allowed outright kind of thing in the zone, or we have the necessary approvals that we need. So it's a little bit awkward, and going through a whole development proposal, which would include the transportation impact study, the development review application, and all of that stuff costs a lot of money on the applicant's end before they even get the funding. So because that includes consultants, it includes traffic engineers, architects, all of this stuff. And granted, they've done a lot already, but to make sure that the building is successful, they have to get these approvals, successful in getting funding, they have to get these initial approvals done first. So it does put it in a different position than a normal development proposal, because a normal development proposal wouldn't be relying on funding to make sure that the development could even happen. But I understand the confusion that it causes in terms of, wait, why are we looking at just the parking lot and the building may not even, happen? But from the applicants, what they've told us is that making sure that you have these approvals done ahead of time is going to significantly guarantee funding versus obviously not having the approvals.
And
so
Mary,
they're in that weird position.
Ask, is that something that the Planning Commission should be concerned with? Because that feels like an extenuating circumstance that's not necessarily our concern.
It is an extenuating circumstance, I think, but I also think it's I think in this case, it's a unique opportunity to see some housing that's gonna get built that we don't always see get built. It's affordable housing for very, very low income seniors, kind of at the lowest end. And so I think with the idea that affordable housing is one of the top priorities of the city, we're trying to work as best as we can with this group to help them try to get the funding, since we do have such a need for affordable housing. I think if it were a different situation and it were just market rate housing or something, we wouldn't even go this route. But because of the unique situation, that is why we're kind of trying to assist them through the process to the best that our ability, while not getting us in any sticky situations down the road.
And so is that fair, Justin? Is that like, that's a, I don't know, that just strikes me as not being fair. I mean, granted, we want affordable housing and all of those things. It seems like the process is being modified.
I defer to staff on how they process this particular applications. I don't think it presents any pragmatic problems. If the funding doesn't come through, I don't think they're going to move forward with any of the project. This is just a puzzle piece that they need in order to ensure that they can try to get this project. And if the funding comes through, then they will complete all the necessary studies that will be based on what they actually get funded to build.
Okay. Go ahead, Commissioner Sherman.
Thanks, Chair Losfeld. I think somewhat to kind of the sequencing puzzle piece kind of question, and to be clear, I'm very sympathetic, having previously worked in affordable housing. So and I hate to be a process stickler. And at the same time, like I'm looking at like on page 5.2, page 8, one of the kind of components talking about consistency with comprehensive plan policies, and we're talking about equity. We're talking about affordability here, and like just looking at this proposal, putting the blinders on, we're talking about a parking lot for housing units that may or may not like happen. And so I just, again, like I said, kind of sympathetic, but I don't know how I would kind of go about kind of applying some of that. But, and so I don't know if there's kind of any thoughts or kind of response on that. I don't want to get into that deliberative space, but just kind of wanting to kind of again, kind of just looking solely at this application and not at the other pieces that may or may not come. If you could kind of share more insight on that from a staff perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you could also, it's owned by Providence. So in terms of additional uses, say, for example, the affordable housing building doesn't get approved, it could also still provide necessary parking that's needed for the hospital, if need be. Of course, that's not the proposal that they have in front of us, but that could also be something that they would propose with a conditional use that's a parking lot as well. So it's not uncommon that they wouldn't have this sort of proposal happen, but the unique situation of the building is kind of part of the whole thing as well, if that's helpful.
Okay, yeah, that is helpful. And maybe I just wish we were talking about parking lot and building to get and fifth story variance at the same time. It feels messy. Final kind of question was, we've been talking a lot at the Planning Commission about the Central Milwaukie Bikeway concept, and I don't see that reflected in here. And what sounds like the preferred alignment we're going with is running right down whatever the street is, right there. And I guess I just would like to see that kind of included. So I want to just kind of maybe hear any thoughts on that in reaction to that question.
Yeah, so we've kept the applicants in the loop about that whole thing as well. The issue with the Central Milwaukie Bikeway is the affordable housing is a little bit ahead of the bikeway in terms of we don't for sure know if that's the proposed route. It may look like that, but we have no confirmation at this point. And then 2 is we don't know what the facilities would look like as well. We don't have those renderings done by the consultant for the Central Milwaukie. So it's a little bit like the process is a little bit ahead of the Central Milwaukie. That being said, though, if they get the funding by the time they come to submit for the full development review, which would include a transportation impact study, we may have more certainty of the Central Milwaukie bikeway plan at that point. So that could work in that project's favor as well.
Commissioner Kostrobody?
Thank you. So it just sounds like they're just trying to get all their ducks in a row to present this to the federal government in order to get the funding. It's not like we're going to approve a 17 car parking lot and then they're going to break ground next week, build it, and then present it to the federal government. Correct?
Correct. I see some nodding of heads. All right, so do any other commissioners wish to discuss this application? Nope. Okay. I think we need to close the public hearing. Is that right, Mary? I'm looking now for...
We can have the applicant present as well or answer any questions.
Is there I do see another attendee's hand raised. That must be the applicant then.
Yes.
So now is an opportunity for the applicant to present.
Okay, let me promote.
And recognizing where we're at and time and with this agenda, if the presenter, if we have any new information or information where you feel like you want to build on staff's report, that would be ideal, rather than restating information that's already been stated, hoping to get to the end of this agenda item before the meeting close.
I don't know if you can hear me. My name's Walter Zizette. I'm the Development Director at Providence Supportive Housing. Thank you for your time tonight. Thanks especially to the staff for their professionalism and their willingness to respond to our many questions over the last year or so as we put this project together. I think given the conversation that I just overheard a little bit about, the main point that I wanted to make was that this is about getting our ducks in a row and lining up an application for about $5 million just for the capital funding needed to construct the project. And this is about also accessing through that same process. It's called the HUD 202, supportive housing for the elderly program, accessing 72 project-based rental assistance vouchers that'll guarantee that 72 residents over the next 50 to 100 years will not have to pay more than 30% of their gross monthly income towards the renting cost. So there's a big public benefit to it. But I also wanted to put forward that it's also about land use, and what we're talking about here today is really kind of the departure point when we started talking to Sarah Architects about this project. And that was, given the context of this site, it's sort of a transitional site from the more institutional hospital setting to the lower density residential setting. So what we've done is try to design a plan, and by making use of the GMU density that those higher density lots offer us, to build a building that's a nice transition point from the institutional density to the residential density, and also by keeping the open space there. And by turning the building around a million different ways over the last year and looking at a bunch of different scenarios, we realized we do need at-grade parking and surface parking right next to the property, and we do need an access point for deliveries to the Elder Place Center and parking for people with disabilities who live there. And we couldn't figure out another way to do it without very seriously harming the overall intent and purpose of the project. So, and with those overriding land use goals in mind, we landed at this site plan and proposal and couldn't figure out a better way to do it, frankly. Other than that, I would just, talk. I'm happy to, if folks would like to know more about the project, I'm happy, not at this time probably, but to give you a preview of what we're talking about. And you'll probably see me again next meeting or on May 11th. And be very happy to do that. And if we have more time on May 11th, I'll bring my slide deck to show you where the plans are right now and everything else about it. I would, again, on the public benefit side of the project, I would just put forward that one thing we've learned about this project is that there's a deep need for affordable housing for extremely low-income seniors. The people at the Elder Place Center that operates on the Milwaukie Hospital campus informed this project a lot by telling us that almost all of their program participants earn less than $10,000 a year. And we're figuring that even though people with incomes higher than this amount may be able to apply and live at this property, we will probably see an average income of residents in this building of between $5,000 and $15,000 a year. And seniors who will be not just higher than the required age of 62 in order to be defined as a senior to live there, but will probably be in their upper 70s, lower 80s is usually the average age for a project like this. So deep affordability, connection to services and healthcare through the Elder Place Partnership, and what I think is a pretty thoughtful land use strategy that incorporates a building design, open space, and at-grade parking, and a combination of parking that using a combination of other parking that's already available on the campus next door.
Thank you, Walter. I appreciate your comments. I will ask if there is any other testimony in support of the application, Mary, and just looking at the attendees, not seeing any hands raised.
So, no.
Okay. At this point, there's an opportunity for commissioners to ask questions for those testimony and support. Do any commissioners have any questions that they'd like to raise? I'm seeing no hands raised by commissioners, so I'm going to go moving on to any testimony in opposition. Marion, not seeing any hands up in attendees.
No hands.
I'm going to move on. Any neutral testimony, and again, opportunity to raise hands for attendees. Seeing none, moving on. So this would be a chance for rebuttal. There is no rebuttal necessary. There's no neutral. There's no opposition. So at this point in time, it makes sense then to close the public testimony. So the public testimony portion of this hearing on file CU-2021-001, the Providence Supportive Housing Conditional Use, is now closed. Opportunity for the commissioners to begin discussion. Who would like to get started? Or I'll pick at random. Commissioner Heemner, it's really unlike you to hold back.
I'll just go ahead and start. Yeah, I'm in support of the project. I realize some of the concern that this seems a little cattywampus, but it's just kind of the way that it kind of has to go. And I am confident that that staff has certainly looked at the minimum and maximum parking standards for this area and for the building and for the trips created, and that if they need to come back with a variance for limited parking, that may happen as well. But it seems like this parking lot is designed and it keeps half of that green space, especially on the part that might be a potential bike path, which is actually pretty nice. There may be some reservations about having your emergency pickup and drop off on the bike lane. But beyond that, that's for a discussion for a different day, maybe. So.
Okay, I'm hearing some initial thoughts about approval. Any other thoughts, commissioners? I could go for a vote if you'd like. Oh, Commissioner Kashrabadi, you've gone off mute and back on mute and off mute.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to say that I like the fact that this is affordable housing. I mean, especially for our low income elderly population. That's something that I'm big on. So that's huge. I appreciate it.
Agreed. Commissioner Sherman?
Yeah, similarly, I was going to say very supportive of it from an affordable housing perspective. I am slightly concerned about how this is sequencing or getting ahead of the Central Milwaukie Bikeway concept work, and that we're going to lose an opportunity to maybe work with Providence to get some of those facilities built. Because by going ahead and starting green light applications as we're like finalizing that plan, I think we lose that leverage. So I personally would be interested in including kind of a condition of approval about the applicant, making right-of-way dedications, easements, improvements as required by the city to kind of implement the bikeway concept plan, assuming that alignment is the one that continues. But I am also supportive.
Okay, Commissioner Sherman, I'm hearing some similar thoughts from Commissioner Heemner. Commissioner Heemner, would you also be supportive of language related to the bikeway?
No, because here's the problem. We do not have a plan. We don't have a design. We don't have anything except for a forum that's gone out to the public on which path do you like. So I think that is unfair burden to the applicant to make them do things for something that there is absolutely no thought put into it except for some public comments.
Maybe just kind of process question, like we approved the application for the parking lot. They have 18 months, 20 months to build it. I mean, we're gonna have a bike plan, and as it was said earlier, we're kind of pushing this through fast to be good partners. So can anybody kind of help me understand that on a from kind of issuance or approval to how long they would have, the applicant would have to build?
Walter, I'm not sure if you can respond to this, but I believe that they are going for funding and sometime in the spring. So I don't know how long it actually takes to go through that federal process to understand whether or not when the funds are coming in, if they're being awarded funds. So there's that part of it. So we wouldn't know if the funds are coming in and if the project was going to come in for approval until we know if the funding has come through. And I'm not sure about that timeline. But to your point, Commissioner Sherman, I am very aware of the Central Milwaukee's Bikeway project and have been sitting in on all of those meetings, and also have similar thoughts about wanting to ensure, if it's possible, that we kind of get the bike path approved. At this point, we don't know that the option on that particular stretch of road is going to be approved by then. Right now, council is still in the deliberations. Well, they hasn't really gotten to council yet for the hearing part, but they still have a lot of questions about the different options. So there's kind of we may have a little bit of delay on when that actually comes through, but I do know that we have been working with Providence. They've been a part of the conversations throughout the entire process. So there is a very strong understanding and I think support of the bikeway if it does go through there. So I'm really hoping that we can continue to have that dialogue and work towards that, even if at this point, I don't think that to the point that we probably don't have enough information to condition this right now with that, because we don't have a firm pathway in sight or adopted at this point.
Okay. Thanks, Laura. That's really helpful. So I guess maybe to those points, hopefully Walter and Providence will continue to be good partners, just as we're being good partners now in trying to help them go after this funding. So I think we can let my point stand.
Yeah, this is Walter. I would just echo what Mary said. We are aware of the bikeway plan and completely supportive of it to the extent that we know the details, or as we understand the details currently. I cannot foresee a reason why we wouldn't coordinate and cooperate with the plan as it relates to this site. It's a good public benefit. It's something that we would want to see, and it's actually something the hospital wants to see, I know for a fact. And so coordination and collaboration on that project is a natural for us in a general way. I mean, we can't sign on the dotted line right here today about it because we don't have the specifics, but in a general way, we want to be a partner with that program as well.
Thank you. Do other commissioners have any thoughts? Okay. I'd like to put this then to a vote.
Motion to approve, make sure I have the right one, CU 2021-001.
That's the one. There is a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All commissioners in favor. There would be no opposed. All right. That's that. Let's move on. This decision per MMC 19.311.6 is conditional approval of a preliminary plan development. It is not appealable decision. The applicant must within 18 months rather, file a final development plan and program, which will be reviewed through the land use application, both planning and commission and the city council as final local decision-making authorities. Moving on then to other business updates. Do commissioners or staff have any other business or updates that they'd like to raise? Laura?
I just wanted to remind everyone that we have the joint meeting finally scheduled with City Council to go over the work plan and to talk about the bylaws. As you all know, it was supposed to be in February. There was the ice storm. The meeting got canceled. So that is on April 20th. And I looked at the agenda and we're at the bottom of the agenda. So it's looking like we're close to 8 o'clock. So just so you know, so I would probably recommend logging in around 7:30 so that you're tracking to see if we get early. That almost never happens. It almost always goes later than proposed or anticipated. So we will be on later that evening. And I think it's on all of your calendars. I think I sent a meeting invite to you all, and then you should have the Zoom link in that meeting invite. And if you don't, all you have to do is go to the City Council webpage and just sign into the meeting on there, and they will promote you to the panel as soon as we are up. So that was just one thing I wanted to mention.
Okay. Commissioner Heemner, now's your chance.
Well, so I know everybody knows that May 21st is Dogwood Day, which is a celebration of our beloved tree in the city and the symbol of the city. Now, why would I be telling you a month in advance? Just to remind you to get your decorations ready and out from the attic to be able to spread it. But the important part is that there is a picture contest on the city website. So go out and take your favorite picture of a dogwood and submit it onto the city's Instagram account. And you can win a prize on May 21st for Dogwood Day. I would also like to remind everybody that your OGC filing is due April 15th, even though that it's not ethically fair that they give it a month before your taxes are due. But you do have to have your taxes filed to be able to submit it along with that. So if you haven't done your taxes and you haven't filed that in, you got 2 days left. It's important because what happens is that if somebody wants to then challenge a planning commission, and they find out that somebody did not file their paperwork, then they can throw all these decisions out. So please fill it out, hand it on in if you haven't done so yet.
And if you forgot your password like I do every year, you need to get started right now. Anything else? Earth Day. Greg, you didn't bring up Earth Day.
Oh, no, yeah.
I feel like you're just supposed to hit all global.
Well, I could, and I don't even know what the city is doing this year for Earth Day. I think it's a virtual event. I know that Milwaukie Environmental Stewards Group is working a little bit with Exceed Enterprises, where our styrofoam collection site is, and we're going to be giving a little bit of a webinar on how to start your own styrofoam recycling center.
Okay. Anything else? Let's see, forecast of future meetings. Lori, you want to hit on that? You're on mute, by the way.
Goodness. You think you hit it off and then it's just, yeah, it happens to all of us. Okay, so right here on this, it says April 27th, there's no items scheduled at this time for our next meeting. However, I've been talking to Vera, and there's been some really interesting things coming up because, you know, we're deep into the implementation process with the CPIC. And so lots of good topics are coming up for discussion. So we're hoping that since we've got this time on the 27th to maybe take up a little bit of time to talk about one, flag lots, because there's lots of opportunities throughout the city to develop on flag lots. Our flag lot standards have changed over time, and they may change again and may need to change again. So we want to get ahead of that conversation and potentially talk about that with you all. And then the second thing is looking at, in the code, we're looking at allowing, so we need to allow duplexes on every lot that allows single family homes, right? But there's also the issue of triplexes and duplexes, and that we could go with a minimum compliance and only allow those in certain areas of the city. It gets really complicated, and I won't get into the reasons why that would be hard to do. Or we can allow them throughout the entire city. And the approach and feedback we've been getting from CPIC is to allow them throughout the entire city. But we want to have that conversation with you all, and we think it would be really beneficial to have that conversation with you all a little bit ahead of when it finally gets to you later. So those are the two things that we're hoping to bring to you on the 27th. And I'm hoping that I can just steal maybe an hour of your time that night to talk about these issues with you. And so if I could either get a yes or a no, that would be great.
And quick clarification, it was triplexes and quadplexes, not duplexes.
Oh, sorry. I thought I said, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
All those in favor? Oh, no one. Oh, one. Okay.
Thank you.
A meeting from 6:30 to 7:30 with no continuation, no extension.
Right, you will have to commit to that.
Yeah, no, I'm going to find so many reasons to get it up to 10:30, 11 o'clock.
And we will have no other business. There will be no new business, no other business. That's it. Is that it? Wait a minute. That's not it?
Well, no, that's it for April 27th. The only other thing that I wanted to give you all a little heads up on is if you could look on the May 11th, it says the informational, the joint meeting with the NDAs. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking that we should do that on May 11th. And so and if I get agreement with you all, then I'll go ahead and start to get that ball rolling and get out an email and get out some questions, and we can talk about that for 5 minutes on April 27th. Just in preparation. So if everybody's good with that, then I will just, okay, great. That's great. All I've got. Thank you.
Okay. Meeting adjourned. 9:23. Look at that. Oh man.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
All right. Would someone like to second?
I second.
Second. All right. Meeting is adjourned, everybody. Well done.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Justin, can I just